product owner role in our past world or our now current world, hopefully not the future world, right? But they were responsible for really getting in with the business and figuring things out. The unfortunate thing is they're not technically part of the business, right? So there's that very key element that we had never had before, that they weren't tied as closely to that business and what that end user really wanted or needed and what problem we were trying to solve for them. So I think that's a big evolution for us, is to really say, okay, we need to reach beyond this person that's kind of the interim and really pull in more into that deep heart of the business and figure out, how we can get more of that breadth of what the customer, the end user really needs.
When companies go through a transition like this, that role of the person who is leading more of because the vision of the product is not necessarily the same as the company vision anymore. And once you have to split those things, that's when those roles really have to change, because that product owner doesn't necessarily, it's not that they're disregarding the company vision, but that's not their focus and that's not what they're incentivized on. Versus this director or this person who at one point owned the product success now is still focused on the company vision and in how they're building teams and doing all those things. I found that to be sometimes some of the most difficult people to split in half in a way, because it's an important role. And those people really need to be that voice of the consumer who's coming in and judging what those things are. But at the same point, they need to have a really good rapport with the team.
Right.
And that's that trust aspect, right? Yeah. So let's talk about trust a bit, because again, I say this all the time, but Agile and Agile transformation is really about people. It's really about culture transformation. In General Mills, and I've always been a huge fan of the brand, but what were some of the specific culture challenges that you had to face as you started to go through that transformation? Was it more physical? Was it like, we don't have an area set up for us? Or do we have to, was it I had to go around and convince 6 different departments to give us their people? And what were some of those things that really on the people side that you felt you saw the biggest opportunity?
Yeah, I would say that for the teams themselves, it was a little bit easier because, like I said, we had kind of that alignment, if you will, within our global business solutions area that really we wanted to focus these teams and these people to really be one team and be working together. We tried the physical part of getting people together, but of course that was a big challenge because, we still have people that are in Mumbai, right? So that obviously adds a big layer of complexity to when you're trying to have one cohesive team. But I think even that again, reaching into the business side of it and saying, okay, what are the things that we're trying to solve for you? Not you need this specific thing and you telling us what you need, but what are the problems that you're having that we can help you solve? And just that slight change of how you ask that question, not what do you need, but what problems are we trying to solve for you, I think is just a big challenge in and of itself. Yeah. So then you get the business people coming back and saying, but I need this, and here's my list of stuff that I want, right? And then here's my 4 number 1 priorities. Well, wait a minute. You can't have 4 number 1s. That's not how it works, right?
Oh, yes, I can. I'm in charge.
All right. But we've always done it that way, right?
Right.
We've always had 4 number 1s. You've always worked on all of my number 1s. So what's the problem?
What's the pushback
right?
here?
Yeah. So
I a few years ago, I walked into a very large organization and would help them with a digital strategy effort. And they brought out and they said, we already have our roadmap. And they laid this thing out. And I looked at it and I said, this is a list of features and release dates. This is not a roadmap. I mean, this is almost a project plan. It's like a half-assed project plan. But in this, where do I see the metrics, the value that's coming out of each of these things, right? Do these 4 things, these 4 features help increase your business by 5% in the next 6 months or something? I'm not seeing that. And I just got blank stares.
Right.
They were just like, I think you're missing the point. And I was like, no, I don't think it's me who's missing the point, but you are my client, so I kind of have to, take that with a little grain of salt. Because that's the thing is that I think that's a big challenge for an organization like the organization you're in, is that bringing new people in or bringing in consultants or all these different things, you're going to get so many different opinions. But only General Mills really knows General Mills, right?
Yes.
And the culture is very unique, and there's a way that you need to treat that, because it is, like I said, a culture transformation.
Absolutely.
What have you been focused on as a leader right now? Which areas are you focused on for your own personal development? What are things that you're personally working on that's been helpful for you in terms of growing along with this role in the organization?
I think a big part of it is what we talked about before, about being a leader that creates a trusting and safe environment. Because you're right, even though I've been with the company for a little while, and of course, certainly not as long as the majority of the people there, right?
Right.
But even, being there, you have to build those relationships and get people to trust you, that you're not just feeding them a line of bologna and just telling them to do stuff, right? That you want improvement for a reason, and here's the reason behind it. So for me, it's about figuring out, how can I make sure that I connect on that personal level with whatever people that I need to make sure that they're comfortable. Because understanding, all right, so what are you scared of about this thing that we're going to try, so that I can make sure that I try and address that. That doesn't mean that I'll necessarily solve it or fix it, right? But at least acknowledge it and address it, so that they feel that they're being heard, and hopefully, kind of put down some of those fears in order to be able to get them to take that step forward. So I think that's a huge part of it.
One of the biggest challenges I have as a leader is that balance between being honest and being optimistic. Being able to go and cheerlead a team, saying, rah, 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 we can do this. We can absolutely do this. Versus being able to go in and grab somebody by the ear and say, like, you're taking the team off track. You've got to change what you're doing, or, kicking in a leader's door and saying, you've got to stop blocking my team. You got to stop sending these emails and whichever. I find that balance is always on my mind, always a challenge. How do you feel when I ask you that question? What comes to mind when I say, how do you balance being honest versus optimistic?
Yeah, I think it comes down to when you find something that you're passionate about, which is, this is something I'm very passionate about. So I think that's why I love my job so much. But you're right in that I've gotten feedback throughout my career about, you're such a calming force, Denise. You don't let your emotions kind of take over, which is sometimes good and sometimes not good, because sometimes you have to be, the force that comes in and just gets ticked off, right? But I think, so you're right, because I do think about that specifically because I've had that feedback before about, how do you make sure that you're showing that you have the passion, but you're not like wildly all over the place, or just being somebody that no one wants to work with because you're off the rails all the time, right? Because to me, that's all part of that trust thing, right? So if you can present yourself in a way that's approachable and trustworthy, and people can come to you, then that's going to help a long way. You
want to be that honest person where people know that if I go to Denise, she's going to tell me like it is, right? But at the same time, I might tell you what your opportunities are, but I'm going to tell them to you in a way where I can see how you're going to grow and what the next level would be, And so I think that's really important, like you had mentioned, having that balance, but also being in an organization or being in a culture that will give you that feedback. That's important, right? Because myself, I didn't become a good leader because I was just natural at it. I had good leaders. I had great people that I had worked for in the past that set good examples. And I also had a few that set really poor examples.
But sometimes that's the flip. That is a good example because you don't know what not to do, right?
Yeah, you know where the floor is, right? You want to know where the ceiling is, you want to know where the floor is, so you can just move right through the hallway, right? Sometimes a leader that you're working with might not be a natural good fit for your personality. You might have personality conflicts. I'm sure a lot of the people listening here have experienced that as well. If you were to talk with somebody and coach them on, maybe I'm having some personality conflicts with my leadership, what are some of the first steps that you would take if you were in that situation? If
I was giving the advice?
Yeah.
I would say, you have to figure out what it is, right? So you have to pinpoint what it is that's the conflict, right? So is it just something that you personally don't like their style? Well, there's a million different ways to do a million different things, right? So you have to kind of figure out, is it worth it, or is it something that you can kind of open your eyes to and kind of see their approach to something and figure it out? If it's something that's detrimental to your team, like you said before, there's somebody that's constantly blocking your team or whatever it is, and it's just something that's literally not working. You have to be strong enough to be able to approach that person and tell them like it is in, a respectful way, of course. But I don't think anyone is done a service if you don't tell them when there's a problem, right? It's always that, why they ask you when you go to the grocery store, did you find everything? Well, no, I didn't. They want to know that because they want to fix the problem, right? I think that's the same case when you have somebody that you're in conflict with or that comes to you when they have some conflict problem. You have to be able to be strong enough to be able to confront that person.
If you're not giving that direct feedback, you're actually kind of messing with that person.
Absolutely.
You're kind of just letting them, it's the emperor with new clothes, right? Sort of situation.
Yes. And I learned an interesting kind of twist on that from somebody that I talked to recently. He told me, he said, instead of asking for feedback, ask for advice. Do you know who that might be?
I don't know who that would be.
And it stuck with me because I've actually done that now. When I've been in situations where I just did a presentation somewhere, I said, all right, what advice do you have for me for the next time that I do this, right? Not feedback. Oh, you did great. It was just fine. No, what advice can I have to improve for the next time? There's got to be something.
Yeah. And honestly, like I've told people, maybe not every single time, but I would say 90% of the time I was talking to a completely different person that I asked advice from versus feedback. Every time. It's a culture thing, and culture sometimes starts as simple as nomenclature, right? I'm going to call this thing agile.
Yeah.
Even though it's really not. I mean, it's not, there's nothing agile about this at all. We're just, we're going to call it these things, but we're not going to really actually do those things. But it's got to start somewhere.
Right.
Right. And I mean, my first agile project, I called the lock and dam technique. And I was like, I'm going to write a book on it because it's like a lock and dam. It's like waterfall and then stop and then QA and then write another scope, waterfall and then stop. And we were very iterative in our waterfall, which I was like, it's like a lock and dam. It's like going down the Mississippi. But again, like, we, at the time we thought this was like part of the Agile manifesto, right? Because we were doing this kind of people over process thing and stuff, but we didn't realize what that actually meant. Like, we thought just by breaking up the process, that would make it easier on the people, right? And again, it was constantly, because of the business, we were having to focus on the process still so much. And it was really making an impact. But what was a big epiphany for me was that I learned to just accept it and be able to build all these case studies of where the process and the business got in the way in terms of metrics. And I was able to present these things back at the end of the engagement when they were like, well, it wasn't as fast as we thought it would be. Well, let me expose to you all the things that happen along the way, and this is just how our business runs. I also went and I mapped the entire process of what it took for something to go through the system, and I meant from inception to like out the door and in trucks sort of thing. And I think it took me 4 months to actually do that map. And people argued with it. They were like, well, that doesn't actually happen in that spot and whatever. Well, what does happen in that spot? Tell me and I'll change it. But by the time it was done, people were able to really see, like, exposed to the issues that we were facing and the weight of it all. Because sometimes when you live it, again, like you said, I mean, this one place that I had mentioned, I went in to help them with this transformation. I mean, most of the leadership had worked there for 30 years. I'd come in and talk about where their customers were doing and this and that, and they'd be like, why are you were going to tell me about my customers? I'm not going to tell you demographically. I'm going to tell you where they're at now, though, because they're not at where you think they are anymore. They're in a whole different place, whole different world. So, Denise, in terms of, what are you doing constantly? And I think I've kind of alluded to this, but the people that listen to the show are usually people very similar situations as yourself. They're project managers, product owners, product people, and or they're senior developers or designers. And a lot of people are kind of looking for that next step. They're looking for, how do I move from my position to the next level at some point?